What do you want to do when you leave school or college? For some of you, this might be the first time in your life where you've actually been in control of the decision making. You get to decide where you go next. Now, there are over 300 universities in the UK offering more than 50,000 different courses, and they go way beyond the traditional academic subjects. Now you can read AI, sustainability, or gender studies. Now, we recognise that actually so much choice, often too much information, whilst also having to consider a careers landscape that's going to keep changing, can be really overwhelming when it comes to making a decision about what's right for you. If you're in lower sixth or year 12 at the moment, I recognise also that actually for you, this term is all about achieving the best predicted grades that you possibly can. But it is also the time to start researching and reflecting. What do you want? Why do you want to go to university? What is it that you're trying to achieve? Where can you find all of the information that you need to make the most informed decision? I'm going to be answering some of the most frequently asked questions in this video. All of them related to how to choose a university course, how to choose the right university. What are the things that I should consider if I'm thinking about studying abroad or a placement year? What if I don't want to go to university? And I'll finish off with some tips for any parents that are keen to guide their children through this decision-making process. My name is Bella Eccles and I'm founder of Tinker Tailor. Over the last 2 months, I've worked with over 300 lower sixth students, helping them decide their next move. Where might they want to go to university? What subjects might they want to read? And helping them prepare for the university application process. But at Tinker Tailor, we don't just focus on academic achievement, because this shouldn't be the only factor that determines a young person's future. We focus as much on skills and experiences as we do the academic profile, because it's a balance of these things that are likely to make them employable. So we work with senior leadership teams and careers departments in schools, as well as individual families, to help deliver a careers programme that isn't just about ticking boxes and university destinations or fortune telling. We're preparing young people for a world of work, the workplace that they're likely to enter. We're teaching them how to make decisions for themselves and how to manage their careers. These are the things that will be far more valuable in the longer term. It's our experience of working with educators and employers that is helping us guide young people, school leavers and graduates, along the path from education to employment. So where do you start? I always recommend that you start by choosing what you'd like to study and then decide where you might like to study it. That'll help you filter the multiple options, but it's also important to remember that you're about to commit for at least 3 years, so you've got to enjoy your subject. As with any career-related decision, it's important to look at all aspects of your life, not just the subjects that you're studying at A-level, but let's start with those. I always recommend look at the 3 or 4 subjects that you're studying. Peel off the titles of those subjects, such as economics or geography or biology, and look more closely at the topics that you've really enjoyed. Which elements have you enjoyed? Which bits have come most naturally to you? Why do you think that might be? What does it tell you about your personality and your natural capabilities? Now, for some of you, the decision might be fairly straightforward. You know that there's a subject that you're enjoying at A-level, and you know that you are ready to dive even deeper and study more independently for the next 3 years. What I would recommend is that you do your research thoroughly into those courses. History at one university can look very different to a course at another university. So do make sure that you look closely at the modules that make up each year of study. If you're not ready to specialise, that's fine. There are plenty of universities that offer combined honours or flexible combined honours and liberal arts courses, which is where you could get to pick 1, 2 or even 3 or 4 subjects that you might enjoy studying for 3 or more years. But very often people will come to me and say, I'm not really enjoying any of my A-levels and I'm not sure I want to take any of them on to study at university. That's fine, but let's go back to looking at the subjects. What are the links maybe between some of your subjects? What are the common themes or threads that run through all of those subjects? What might that mean for you in future? You might need to think a little bit further forwards and think about some careers that you might want to explore and then come back to consider some courses that could be relevant. You might be enjoying something like history and biology and therefore decide that you want to explore anthropology, which is a really nice combination of both of those subjects. Two things though, do your research and don't make assumptions. Do be mindful of the fact that you're going to have to write a personal statement that demonstrates to an admissions tutor that you have a genuine interest in that subject, even though you've never studied it before. Some of you might be considering a course that is related to a specific career, such as medicine, law, engineering, vet science, architecture. Now, the first thing that you need to think about is, are you ready to commit for 5 to 7 years in some cases? That said, there are many people that read subjects like law and engineering and don't necessarily follow that path into those careers. You'll still be gaining invaluable skills and gathering experiences that will be really useful regardless of what career path you follow. If you've decided that maybe medicine or veterinary science or architecture is too long to commit to, but actually you're still really interested in those subjects, look beyond the obvious ones and consider something like health economics, architectural design, or animal science. But as I say, all the way through this research process, don't make any assumptions and do your research. When picking a subject, you also need to think, where could this take you? It's okay not to know what you want to do with the rest of your life. Don't just pick a subject because you think it will be useful or make you sound smarter. What's most important is that you pick a subject that you're going to enjoy and that you will excel at. But when researching courses, don't just look at the modules. Think about the skills and the experiences that course might provide you with. Yes, knowledge will be useful, but actually employers are far more interested in the skills and experience that you've gathered, and an admissions tutor will want to see that you understand the relevance of your subject in the wider world. Also, don't just assume that law is a subject for people who have studied history and English. Don't think that picking a STEM subject will be essential to entering the technology sector. If you're looking for inspiration, when you attend any university open days, talk to lecturers and course directors, ask them where have their graduates gone over the last few years. Something else that you'll need to think about when choosing a course is, what are the requirements? Are they realistic? Are you likely to achieve the grades that are required for that particular course? But your research should also include, what subjects does that course require? In many cases, economics will require a maths A-level. If you want to study psychology and you haven't done it at A-level, you're likely to have studied a science. So do look at the course requirements. This will also help you filter the many options that could be available to you. The last thing that you need to think about is, how are those courses delivered and how are those courses assessed? Are you someone who prefers exams and independent study? Or are you someone who maybe prefers coursework and group project work? The good news is that courses exist for every learning preference, so do pick one that you know will work for you. Personally, I think the choice of course is more important, but it does depend on what you're trying to achieve. If you're particularly focused on a specific career path, the league tables that you should be looking at are the subject league tables and the employer league tables. What's interesting is that Russell Group universities won't necessarily rank higher in those cases. If you're interested in fashion and textiles, Manchester Met and Loughborough rank higher than Edinburgh. Sheffield Hallam and Nottingham Trent are often targeted by employers who are looking for civil engineering graduates. And the property sector targets students at universities like Oxford Brookes and Reading. If you're unsure about what you want to do, you might want to consider the overall rankings. There's no doubt about it that the large management consultancy firms, the law firms and the bulge bracket investment banks will always target the top universities. Likewise though, many smaller organisations will target more local universities. So now you can start thinking about where might you like to study. There are a few things that you need to consider. The first is obviously the course requirements. This will help you filter some of your options quite quickly. Do be realistic though. It's okay to have maybe one that is aspirational, but the other 4 choices, they should be pretty solid and safe options. You might want to think about the reputation of that university. Don't just look at the overall rankings. Look at that course's reputation for teaching, research, employability stats, and student satisfaction. I always recommend assessing a university on its careers provision. How much support will you get from the careers department? Interestingly, particularly since COVID, employers are now putting more emphasis back on the universities to guide their students and are spending less time actually on campuses. For some of you, location will be an issue. You maybe only want to be a matter of miles from home. Maybe you're really excited about the idea of being hundreds of miles away from home. Do you want to be in a city or would you rather be out of a town? Are you considering looking at a collegiate university? All of these things are merely about personal preference. Where are you going to feel most comfortable? Where are you most likely to thrive? It's okay to compromise on the course, but I would say don't deviate too far from your preferred subject path. What's most important is that you actually enjoy what you're studying and that you excel at it. An example of a bad compromise would be in your mission to secure a place at UCL, you veer away from economics that requires A-star AA and choose something like archaeology that requires ABB. A good example might be looking at Durham University, you realise that competition for places to read economics is really high, but that actually it's maybe easier to get onto a course like business management. Likewise, you could be looking at Southampton University. Rather than just ancient history that requires 3 A's, you might look at ancient history and archaeology that's an A and 2 B's. Where you start to compromise on university, this is where you should be looking at the university's rankings, both in terms of student satisfaction and employability. If you're interested in reading communication and media studies, for example, Loughborough ranks just as highly in student satisfaction, employability and teaching as Edinburgh and Bristol, but actually has lower requirements. However high or low grade requirements might be, that doesn't necessarily reflect how academically demanding a course will be. It purely comes down to demand. Russell Group universities certainly rank highest in terms of the teaching, resources and research, but attending a Russell Group university won't necessarily make you more employable. Where they really have the advantages, the access they might provide you with to a professional network. The larger graduate recruiters will typically spend more of their budget targeting Russell Group universities. They might sponsor annual events like the annual Law Society dinner. But increasingly, employers are focusing less on prestige and more on what somebody has studied and what they've achieved academically. It's much better to attend a university where you're going to thrive and achieve a 2-1 than find yourself at a university or on a course that you're maybe not really enjoying. If you don't attend a Russell Group university, you just might have to be a little bit more proactive when it comes to networking with professionals in the sectors that you're maybe interested in getting to. Interestingly, there are some larger organisations such as Ernst & Young who are now taking institutions off their application process because they're actually more interested in maybe the subject that you've studied and actually the skills and the experiences that you've gained whilst you've been there. It's also worth noting that some of the best known and well-respected universities aren't actually members of the Russell Group. Universities like Bath, St Andrews, Loughborough, Surrey all have great reputations and have courses that rank very highly. Whether you've studied A-level or IB, it's really unlikely to limit or impact your options. Where you're applying for maybe an interdisciplinary course like flexible or combined honours or liberal arts, admissions tutors may favour somebody who studied IB. BTECs are obviously the equivalent to an A-level and certainly won't be a barrier to university, but they are likely to make Russell Group less achievable. What's most important is if you've studied BTECs is to do some thorough research into how are those courses delivered and how are they assessed. Make sure that you are choosing a course that's in line with what's been delivered on your BTEC courses. Is there plenty of project work and coursework? Thankfully these days, there are plenty of viable alternatives to university, so much so this section could take up 10 minutes alone. So I'm just going to focus on what I think the headlines are and give you some things to think about. What is most important is that when you leave school or college is that you continue to learn. Education shouldn't be seen as something that is completed when you leave school. Lifelong learning is now going to be essential if you are going to continue adapting to the landscape that is likely to keep changing. So what you really need to think is, where do I want to continue to learn? And this will depend upon two things. Where is it that you're trying to get to, and how do you learn best? When thinking about where it is that you want to get to, you'll be thinking, is a degree essential for the path that I would like to follow? Or indeed, is it that you're focused on getting into a sector where you know they value experience over academic qualifications? How you learn best will depend upon whether you are someone who is excited about continued academic and independent learning, or whether you are more of an experiential learner. Do you learn better through experience, hands-on experience, and interacting with people? In which case, a higher or a degree apprenticeship might be best for you. A higher apprenticeship usually lasts 18 months to 2 years, where you will spend probably 4 days a week with the employer learning on the job and 1 day a week with their learning provider, where you'll be getting classroom training. A degree apprenticeship is where a university will partner with an employer. You will probably spend 4 days a week working with the employer and 1 day a week at the university. 3, 4 or 5 years later, you will have gathered 3 or 4 years experience, and you'll also leave with a degree. Graduating with experience or completing a higher apprenticeship where you've had 18 months of hands-on experience seems like the most sensible route. But there are pros and cons to both, and it comes down to, as I say, what it is that you're trying to achieve and how you learn best. One of the great advantages is that you will leave university or your course with no debt. The employer will pay your tuition fees and you'll be paid a salary. It's an opportunity for you to get hands-on and relevant work experience. It's a chance to develop your professional network. It's also an opportunity to try out a sector earlier than you might have done had you gone to university. I should say that if you do a higher or degree apprenticeship in something like surveying, it doesn't mean that you have to continue along that path for the rest of your life. You will have had 2 to 4 or 5 years experience of working with an employer and getting a qualification. You might choose to take those skills and qualifications elsewhere. But you do need to think about, are you happy to compromise and actually not enjoy the student lifestyle that so many of your friends are? You won't live in the usual university accommodation necessarily. You won't get the long summer holidays. So you do need to think about, are you suited to the course and to the employment experience? Are you ready to balance some academic study with getting to grips with working in the real world? It essentially comes down to, are you someone who wants to learn and earn? So go to university and maybe earn a bit of money in the holidays. Or are you somebody who wants to earn and to continue learning? With employers placing so much more emphasis on skills and experience, for many people, combining their course with some employment experience would seem like a no-brainer. It's a great opportunity for many students to start putting their academic subject into the context of the wider world. These courses come under all sorts of different names. Sometimes they might be called a sandwich course or a course with employment experience. Those won't necessarily involve an entire year, so do find out how much experience you're expected to get as part of that course. A year in industry kind of says what it does on the tin, and you're likely to have to pick experience that is directly relevant to the subject that you are studying. There are some things that you need to consider though. You're ultimately delaying graduation and the opportunity to get out and earn some money for another year. Do think about what support will the university give you in securing that placement. Careers departments do vary in quality from university to university. So it is worth assessing what ties do they have with employers and how much support will that university give you in securing that placement. Do you even have to decide now? Some universities will let you decide towards the end of your first year whether you want to combine your course with experience. Do think about what are you actually trying to achieve. And the last thing is that if you are planning to do a placement course, you're likely to be applying for that placement towards the end of your first or into your second year at university. And that application process is really likely to involve you demonstrating any previous experiences that you've had. So it's really important that you start gathering as much work experience as possible now so that you really stand out in those application processes. The first thing I would say is start by thinking about what are you trying to achieve. Some US and European universities will look good on future applications. They'll show that you're somebody who was ready to step outside their comfort zone, maybe someone who is a self-starter or someone who is adaptable. But UK institutions are really well respected internationally as well. So don't just do it to look good or to improve your prospects. You need to think, are you comfortable with the idea of moving to a new country, learning in a new language, adapting to an entirely different culture, and maybe having to develop an entirely new friendship group? How transferable will your degree or qualification be? If you were to return to the UK, if you've studied something like law, you're likely to then have to do further study to make sure that that degree is relevant to the country that you're living in. And finally, if you're not sure, think about how you might be able to incorporate some international study into a course that you are studying in the UK. UK institutions have ties with some great universities internationally, and this may well be an option for you. You'll also need to think about the costs involved. They don't vary a great deal from country to country. The annual fees for university in the States and some in Europe aren't dissimilar to what you would be paying to study in the UK, but do remember that you won't necessarily have the same financial support in place. In most other countries, you may have to pay for your semester fees in advance. It's worth thinking about that. And you also need to consider the cost of living in the particular country or city that you might be based. But most importantly, if you've made the decision and you know that you want to go to a European or a US university, be aware of the application processes and the application timelines. In Europe, timelines really vary. The application deadlines, some are November, others are in March. The process in the States doesn't require a personal statement, but you will need to write an admissions essay. You'll have to take different exams as well. Where do these fit into the process? The sheer range of courses that are available, how these are assessed and delivered, and of course the workplace that your son or daughter will be entering is entirely different to what it looked like 20 years ago. So my first point would be is do some of your own research. It goes without saying that, as with all career-related decisions, this is their decision to make. So it is important that we hold back on judgment and making statements too early without having done some of our own research. So what you can be doing as a parent, though, is encouraging your son or daughter to do some of their own research. Very often they're quite swayed by what their friends are doing, or they do what they think that you want them to be doing. Make sure that they're not making assumptions and just going with their gut. Gathering information combines a little bit of emotion. i.e., where do I picture myself? Where do I like the idea of going to university? It involves a bit of gathering the opinions of other people who've maybe been to those universities or studied those courses. But in the most part, it must come down to their own research, and it needs to be extensive research so they know that they've got all of the information that they absolutely need. As parents, you can help by questioning but not judging. Very often I will hear of parents saying, well, how useful will a geography degree be? Let them have time to reflect on it. Just question them, what is it that's motivated them to make that particular decision? If your son or daughter is really struggling with choosing a course, or they simply don't know what subject it is that they're interested in, help them think about all aspects of their life. What are they interested in? What are they naturally good at? What did they used to enjoy doing but maybe have completely forgotten? As with all career-related decisions, these things take time. This research should take some time, and then some time to reflect. So be mindful of the timeline. Your son or daughter may well be asked to write a first draft of this personal statement, but in most cases will probably be expected to submit their first draft by September. So the next 3 to 6 months does need to be spent doing the research into the courses and making sure that they've then left enough time to gather the evidence that they might need for their personal statement. With that timeline in mind, I would recommend that they have narrowed down their options probably by June, and that will give them the summer holidays to think and to reflect and to gather that all-important evidence. Even if they are online this year, we highly recommend that you do at least 2 or 3, or ideally attend all online open days for the universities that you're hoping to target. You will gather all sorts of useful information, and actually what we're noticing is that away from the large lecture halls, people are more confident about asking questions online, so everybody's kind of winning. There's more information going back and forth. Open days are a great opportunity to ask questions directly to the people who may well be reading your personal statements. This is where you can ask them, what makes a good personal statement? What do you like to see? What should I avoid? You can always go and do a drive around the city or the campus or the university that you're thinking about attending to get a gut feel if it feels like the right location. There is loads of information out there, so I'm just going to share with you some of my personal favourites. UCAS, the UCAS website is always a good place to start. By looking at the different universities and maybe your preferred subject choice, what it will do is give you an idea of other courses that could be aligned to that subject. My next favourite is Unifrog. If you are at a school that subscribes to Unifrog, do use this tool. Their university search tool in particular will help you filter the hundreds of options that might be available to you by looking at either just Russell Group or any university. You can search based on location, rankings, but it's also brilliant at helping you think outside the box a little bit. It might highlight a course to you that you had no idea that existed. Prospects.act.uk is a great website for finding out more about what skills might you develop on that course, what work experience might help you get there, and also it gives you some ideas of what you could do with your degree. The complete university guide will offer you all of the rankings that you might be interested in looking at, from subject league tables to student satisfaction and employability. When it comes to picking a course, do also talk to your teachers. Ask their opinion of how well they think you'll cope with a particular course. For example, you might have picked psychology, but do listen to your teacher's opinion if they say they think you might struggle maybe with some clinical aspects of that course. And the last place that you should find the information from is obviously the university websites. Once you've narrowed down your options a bit, that's where you should go to the individual sites and do your thorough research on the modules that make up each year of study.